Hello my dear sewing friends, it's Alisa here, and today I would love to share with you one of the options of how you can take a men's button-up shirt that's a little bit bigger than your own size and transform it into a beautiful shirt that would fit you. Now last time I did an upcycle where the sleeve was a tad more complex. It's this purple shirt right over here. But since then I thought about another option that would work really great for an upcycle of this kind. It's a little simpler, a little bit more straightforward, but it will still give you a good result. So we will walk through different options. As always, I'll guide you step by step and through the decisions that I made and why I made them. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and let's get started. As always, first let's go ahead and put the shirt on ourselves and let's assess what we're working with. Now this is actually my husband's shirt that he no longer wears, and as you can tell, it's definitely big on me in all of the aspects, starting from the neckline to the sleeves, the length, the width, pretty much everything. And when I started working on an upcycle, I really pay attention to these details because I'm sort of looking for an anchor. I'm looking for a detail or a part of the garment that either fits really well or perhaps something that I don't want to compromise, something that I don't want to change, or something so unique that I don't want to lose. When I pick that anchor, I start working around it, and that therefore also builds that roadmap of the entire upcycle, just like I did in that purple shirt. My anchor was the neckline because it fits so well. Therefore, I worked around it. Here, it's a little bit of a different situation because nothing really fits. From one point, it gives you a little bit more freedom. From the other perspective, we will need to do a little bit more sewing, a little bit more design work, but it's definitely going to be fun and wearable. First, though, I will start by unpicking the sleeves because most certainly it has to be done. I'm going to start working on the sleeves here in just a moment, but I wanted to point out a couple of extra things. First of all, this shirt is stretched, so there's a little bit of give in the fabric, which can actually work in our favor during this process. Then there is this button placket, which feels like there's no interfacing in it whatsoever. Therefore, after the wash, it looks like this if you don't iron it out, and it's a little bit challenging to do so. So I might need to problem solve that, so that way I don't have this situation in the future. And then of course we have a bust pocket. If I decide to keep it, it will stay as is. If I decide to relocate that or unpick it, I'll have to think through if the stitching is going to be visible, and if so, what am I going to do about it? Alright, so the pocket is off and there are some stitch marks visible as expected, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as on the purple shirt. And by the way, I wasn't able to get rid of those stitch marks completely on the purple shirt, which does bother me quite a bit. But interestingly, these two shirts are quite different in terms of fabric. In the purple one, the fabric is drapier, a lot gentler. It's also more lightweight than this one. It's also an older shirt. This one is slightly newer. And here the fabric is 98% cotton. It's coarser. It has a little bit of stretch to it. So we'll see if all of those factors will help us out a little bit. One of you suggested to use the tip of your nail and sort of push the fibers back together and see if you can fill in those holes. And it does definitely help. I just see a little bit of shine on top of the fabric that I create by this movement, so just kind of keep that in mind. All right, let's add a little bit of steam to this situation to see if that will help. Sort of fluff up the fibers a little bit. Oh yeah, it's nearly invisible. The sides are definitely almost gone, but the bottom I can still see the shape of the pocket, but I think it's definitely a lot better, so I think I can live with that. Next, I'm going to undo the side seams and we're going to put the shirt on ourselves and taking the sides. All right, the side seams are undone, but before pinning them together, let's go ahead and pin these shoulders because we are going to be creating dolman sleeves or grown-on sleeves, and it only makes sense to make them look a little bit better, sort of tapering them in. Now, you don't have to do that, but I do think that it's going to contribute to a better looking shirt in the end. Now I'm going to pin the side seams. Let's take it off and see what we've got. First, let's go ahead and take care of these shoulders. Here I'm going to take my marking tool and I'm going to mark where I have pinned, and then I will very, very slowly curve it back into the seam that we have here for the front and the yoke of the back. Then I'm going to copy all of these markings on the other side as well. Next, I will need to open up the seam. Also decided to undo the top stitching all the way to the collar and the neckline because I'm probably going to be removing it, so might as well just undo the top stitching and do it fresh once this adjustment is done. Now what I want to do is I want to place the front pattern piece and the yoke right sides together, aligning at the markings, and if needed you can also give it a really good press in order to straighten out those seam allowances. Then I'm going to pin it. Now we're going to stitch it together. It is definitely a little bit awkward to sew this little part, but the main goal is to create a really smooth transition from the old seam onto the new seam, so that way from the right side of the garment it doesn't have any lumps or bumps. However, from the wrong side of the garment, we still have all of the seam allowances and raw edges exposed and the second layer of the yoke that is not attached. But we're going to tackle that in a moment. From the right side of the garment, I want to give it a really good press. I'm going to go back to the inside, and first I'm going to trim the seam allowances so that way we reduce a little bit of that bulk. Once that is done, I'm going to take the piece of the yoke that is not attached just yet, and I'm going to fold it in a way that it goes right on top of that stitching line by tucking the seam allowances to the inside. Then I'm going to give it another really good press and pin it all together, but from the right side of the fabric, because that's how we're going to be top stitching it and sandwiching everything together. Since I unpicked all of the original top stitching, now I'm going to do this from the shoulder seam all the way to the neckline. And here, go slow and steady, because not only we want to have a nice top stitching, but we also want to catch the other part of the yoke that's underneath. Once I'm done, I'm going to repeat all of the same steps on the other shoulder as well. Alright, very nice little shoulder slope over here, looking much better. Now let's go ahead and tackle the side seams. I simply evenly pinned both of the side seams and then drew a seam line on one of them, so that way I can pin it from the wrong side of the garment, put it on myself, and see if I need to make any adjustments before I sew it all together. That allowed me to determine that I could probably take in a little bit more at the bust level, which is great news for the type of sleeve that we're doing. Here's how I had my pins previously. Now I want to move them a little bit closer to my bust. So let's zoom in. And here I'm going to come in about 1 inch. So I'm going to mark it like this. And I'm going to curve it in back into the line that I've created previously. And here at my bust level, I want to make a little sleeve, or the beginning of the sleeve to be exact. Next, I tidied up the sleeve by leaving it slightly curved on the top and then mostly straight on the bottom. After that, I cut off anything that's excess, but while doing that, don't forget that you will need to add seam allowances to all of the seams that you're creating. That includes the sleeve and the side seam. Once you have achieved everything that you want on one side of your garment, let's go ahead and copy that to the other side. To sew the side seams, I went for a simple straight stitch and then a serger to finish the raw edges of the fabric. Hem of the shirt was next on my adjustment list, but you can also leave it till the very end. It's totally up to you. The easiest way to go about it is to determine the length, then do a straight line across. Once you cut it off, use the existing hem in order to create that beautiful curve. I'm not going to finish the hem just yet because I still want to add interfacing to the button placket. So now let's move on to the sleeves. I'm going to place it in a way that the seam is going to be on the bottom, and then over here I gave it a little bit of a press. Now here's my shirt, but before I do anything else, I actually want to take the armhole and I want to fold in the seam allowance towards the inside and pin it. So I'm going to do that to the entire armhole. It's just going to make this next step a little bit easier because now I'm going to grab my sleeve and we're going to combine these together. And the way I want to do it is so that the shoulder seam and the sleeve create one continuous straight line. So I'm going to push the sleeve a little bit underneath the shirt itself, and then I'm going to overlap these. Again, I'm paying attention over here so that way it's nice and straight, but I'm also trying to see where the width of the sleeve would match the armhole. And once I find that spot, which is actually here, it's perfect, I'm going to take my marking tool and I'm going to create the new shape of the sleeve. Let me mark the center of the sleeve, and we're also going to mark the top of the armhole. In this case, the front and the back of the sleeve is going to be identical. Now all I have to do is cut it off, but remember that we have to add seam allowances above the line. Now when it comes to the seam allowances, I know that I haven't really given you a very concrete amount and width to go by, and that is simply because there's just a lot of different variables when it comes to the width of your seam allowance, starting with the type of fabric that you're using, and then of course the type of seam that you're going to be constructing. Is it going to be a French seam or a flat fill seam? Because both of those will require wider seam allowances than, for example, just a regular straight stitch finished with a zigzag or a serger like I'm doing in this case. On top of that, when I do upcycles, I'm often limited by the amount of fabric that I have, which is usually not nearly enough to do everything that I want to do. So sometimes you just really have to get a little bit inventive, but as a rule of thumb, I usually go for 3/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch seam allowances, unless I really have to get creative because there's just not a lot to work with. One of the things to keep in mind when you're doing this adjustment in an upcycle is that it's going to shorten your sleeve. So before you do the final adjustment and cut off the sleeve, make sure that you're happy with the length of it, especially if you intend to keep it long. I also wanted to point your attention to the fit of the sleeve, because oftentimes when something is a little bit easier to draft, a little bit easier to sew, in exchange we get something that isn't as precise in the fit, usually a little boxier and a little roomier in the silhouette. And here you can clearly see that in the underarm section. There's a lot more volume over there. This type of sleeve also hangs differently on the body than a traditional regular set-in sleeve. Perhaps it's a little bit more casual, a little bit more roomier, not as fitted, but you can still use the sleeve in a variety of different garments. I've used the sleeve in a jacket, in a hoodie, and a sweater. In fact, I have a full video about drafting this sleeve and the bodice step by step, and there I go into great detail about how you can construct the sleeve, what to pay attention to in the underarm section, so that way you have enough ease over here to move freely, and all of the things that you will need. So I will leave that video for you guys in a description if you want to use it in your future designs. And this type of sleeve also doesn't have any ease in it, so it's really easy to sew it into your armhole. Just align your seam of the sleeve with the side seam, and then align the top of the sleeve with the previous marking on the shoulder that we've made, and then pin everything in them round and finish it with a straight stitch and a serged edge. I also decided to go for a short sleeve since I'm intending to wear the shirt during summertime. Therefore, I did chop off quite a significant amount. Whatever was left, I did turn up to the right side of the garment, then tucked in the seam allowance, which in return created a little cuff. To keep everything in place, I stitched it down with a straight stitch right on the edge. Next, I unpicked the entire neckline. In your case, of course, you don't have to do it, but in my situation, it simply didn't fit. And then, of course, I was on a mission to reinforce that button placket, for which I had to undo stitching around it and then remove the buttons. After that, I simply opened the button placket, reinforced that with a strip of interfacing, and then closed it down by doing all of the steps that I just undid, meaning all the stitching and adding back the buttons. For these next two techniques, I have very detailed tutorials on my channel. Therefore, we're going to go through them right now rather quickly. The first one is going to be the hem. I usually complete hems like that using a narrow double fold hem technique. It is super useful. You can vary it depending on the project. Therefore, if you haven't explored it yet, definitely do it. It's going to serve you really well. Next, I'm going to complete the neckline, and I'm going to start by stabilizing it with narrow strips of interfacing. After that, I'm going to grab whatever fabric I have left and cut bias strips about 2.5 inches wide and in the length a little bit longer than the total length of the neckline. Then I pressed it in half just like you would with any other bias tape, and I applied it to the neckline. This is great because you can also shape bias tape, therefore it sits even better on the neck. And overall, if you're looking for a neat and simple solution in situations like these, this is a great option. And because it's cut on the bias, it adds a little bit more interest if you're working with stripes. Alright, so let's take a look at what do we have so far, and pretty much we are done. At this point you can leave it as is, but I do think that I could benefit from a couple of darts. I don't really think that I need darts up front, but in the back to reduce a little bit of the volume, so that way I can tuck it in, I can wear it untucked, whichever way, and it would still look great. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand straight and I'm going to determine how much volume do I actually want to take out of the back. And I'm going to do that at my waist level, because in this case, the waist is the smallest of the three measurements between the bust, waist, and hips. So I'm going to do that at the waist level. That's where the dart is going to be the biggest on the intake as well. Now, obviously, this is a super simplified method, but nonetheless, it's going to give us that shaping that we're looking for. And then if you'd like, you can use the same steps in order to give your other garments in the wardrobe a little bit more shaping and sort of take them in a little bit. Now, for my next step, I'm going to find my bust apex, and I'm going to do that on the front because it's a little bit hard to do that in the back. You would be doing something like this. And also, the bust apex sort of corresponds to the beginning of the shoulder blade, so we're just going to use that. Now, just to be on the safe side, we can also mark where we have our waist here on the front. Now we're going to take this off and of course draw in our darts and sew them in. First, let's transfer these markings from the front of the shirt onto the back. There they are. Now I'm going to measure how much I have pinned from the pin all the way to the fold of the fabric. I'm only going to measure one side instead of measuring two because we have two darts, therefore it's going to work out perfectly. I'm going to unpin the back, and now I'm going to find the center back of the entire garment. You can of course do that by folding your garment in half, but I prefer to measure the back yoke seam and then divide it in half. And because we're working with stripes, it's going to be super easy to make a straight line. From the straight line that I just did down the center back of our garment, now I'm going to do a perpendicular line just about the waist level that we have marked. I've taken this straight line all the way to the side seam. Now I'm going to take each half and divide it in half. And that is going to be the position of my dart. Now I'm going to determine the length of my dart, and I don't necessarily want to go all the way up to the upper marking, so I'm going to stop about an inch before it. So I'm going to take a straight line up, and then I'm gonna go, let's say about 10 centimeters below the horizontal line that we drew a little bit earlier. There it is. So I have a straight line right over here. Now I know that you can't really see these markings that well, so I will try to do my absolute best in order to make it a little bit better. Now right here at the crossing of these two lines, we are going to take that measurement that we took of the pinched in fabric in the back. In my case, it was 3/4 of an inch. We're going to divide it in half, and we're going to place those measurements on each side of this vertical line. Now we're going to complete the dart. We're going to connect it to the upper part, which will make a triangle, and we're going to do the same on the bottom. Once done, all we have to do is copy it on the other side of the garment and then sew them up. Now you might find it easier if you do all of these dart markings on the inside of the garment instead of on the outside, but it just so happens that my water-soluble marker actually bleeds through the fabric, but just keep that in mind when you're going to be working on your darts. To pin the darts, I usually start in the middle. I take a pin and I insert it through both layers of the fabric right at the markings. Then I bring the fabric together and place the pin through. Then I place one pin at the very top of the dart and one at the very bottom. I do, however, prefer basting the dart together before sewing it. Now you can also apply exactly the same principle in order to form the darts in the front. In that case though, make sure that the vertical line of the dart goes through the bust apex. But as I mentioned, this is a very simplified version, but don't forget, you are totally in control of all of the garments that you draft, sew, upcycle, and create. Therefore, if you try it on, if you feel that, okay, you know what, I would like to bring the darts a little closer together, or perhaps I would like to push them further apart because that is going to look better, then of course, absolutely go for it. You can sew this type of dart two different ways. You can either start in the middle, go up, then start again in the middle and go down, or you can do it all in one go, which is what I'm going to do right now because my dart isn't really that big. Therefore, I'm just gonna start at the top and finish all the way in the bottom. After that, as always, give your darts a really good press, and that's it. Let's take a look at the final result. I think a good part of any successful upcycle is to actually think ahead of what you're going to wear with this new upcycle. In this case, I had two ideas. First, I wanted to create a put together but still quite casual outfit with these wide leg linen pants that I made 2, maybe even 3 years ago. On the other hand, I also wanted to wear the shirt in a more of a sporty way with these summer shorts that I also made. I definitely love a garment that you can wear in multiple ways, and this shirt is going to be perfect for those summer days. I'm sure that you have noticed that my sleeve curls up a little bit. It's still the same sleeve, I simply added one little element. I just wanted to add a little bit extra detail to this garment. All I did is create a rectangle piece of fabric with a buttonhole on one end, then I sewed the other end inside of the sleeve right where the shoulder seam is at. I also added one of the buttons that I cut off from the rest of the garment, and then by simply bringing it all the way around and then buttoning it up, it curls up the sleeve and creates what you see right here. Big shout out to the members of the channel. Thank you so much for your support, and don't forget to check out your members perks. There's more than 70 members extra videos, there is a special members extra mini series, and a lot more different perks, so definitely check them out. And there you have it, another wearable upcycle from a men's shirt. Now if you want to see how I upcycle pants, skirts, sweaters, dresses, and more, then definitely click right over here. Each video has 3 upcycles, so you will definitely have plenty of inspiration when you're ready to get your next project going. Until next time, happy, thoughtful sewing. Bye!